Welcome, everyone. Please silence your phones and spill out any speaker cards and bring them up here. Bring them to Inga over here to the left. Any speaker cards. The lady over here to the right has it. And with that, we'd like to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Dad. And with that, we'll have the roll call.
Chairman Dove.
Present.
Mr. Davidson. Mr. Garrett.
Here.
Mr. Lane. Secretary Giacometto.
Present.
Lieutenant Governor Nungesser. Mr. Alford.
Here.
Mr. President Jewell.
Here.
Mr. Cowell. Mr. Jordan.
Present.
Mr. Bourgeois.
Here.
Mr. Hidalgo.
Here.
Ms. Cormier.
Here.
Mr. Carville.
Here.
Mr. Lane.
Here.
Representative Zarang. Senator Henskins. You have a quorum.
And we have a quorum. Our first matter is the approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Dalgo. Second. Second by Mr. Jordan. All in favor?
Aye.
That motion passes. Approval of the minutes. Motion to approve the minutes. Dwayne Bourgeois. Second by Mr. Hidalgo. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Any public comments on the minutes or the agenda? Any public comments going once, twice, three times? That passes. Old business. Any board members wishing to discuss any old business or announcements? Any members? Seeing none, we'll move on. The next one we have is the CPRA implementation update. Glenn Leday, Executive Director of CPRA. Mr. Leday.
Thank you, Chairman Dove, members of the board. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today on an implementation update. We've got a really good agenda for you today and excited to go through these projects. So with that, I'll kick it off. As always, right before we get started, want to just share just the amount of projects that we have in the agency as we present to the board every month. As you saw last month, we currently have 107 active projects. We have upwards of 130 throughout this fiscal year. So we'll be continuing to expand that number as we continue this fiscal year program. And then as we talked about in our annual plan presentations, trying to get towards 80 and 90% of money spent on construction. So right now we have 43 projects total in construction, 59 in engineering design, and then another 5 in planning, with a lot of other planning activities ongoing. So a lot of activity at the agency, and we'll continue to ramp that up every month. But just excited to show the different types of projects. And then, as you know, we talk about in the master plan, we're utilizing all of the different types of tools to try to combat coastal erosion and land loss. So we'll continue to do that and update the board on those activities. Today we have really a big, exciting announcement at the agency, and so want to share this with everyone and the board today before we roll out a press release. We are in the process of awarding the first construction contract on the river reintroduction into Maurepas Swamp project. And as I know I and others have presented to this board, this is a critical project. Not only is it work-in-kind credit for the major West Shore flood protection project, it is also mitigation for that program. So it's really a precedent-setting project. We're funding this first reach with state-only dollars. This is really the start of what we hope to become really precedent-setting work, both on the federal partnership with the Corps as well as mitigation work for these areas. So this is the first phase that'll be awarded. It is going to Philway Construction, a construction company headquartered in South Louisiana. This project is a little over $8 million. It's the guide levees that will take place. The construction will take place between Airline Highway, Interstate 10, that area through Hope Canal. And so we'll be initiating that work. It'll be clearing and grubbing and the guide levees work. And then as you'll see over the coming months and years, we'll be proceeding with the other reaches of this project. We'll be giving actually a detailed update to the board next month on this project as well as West Shore, but just wanted to announce this really key critical component of the first construction award for this program. So it's really a precedent-setting milestone for the agency and for the state. In addition to that, as we started doing this spring, we want to update everyone on construction updates on key projects that we're either awarding or just initiating or about to go to construction on. And so as you see here, some of these will be providing detailed updates to the board in the coming months, but just want to notate all of the activity that's going on in the agency. We usually pick a handful of projects to do that with. So as you see there on the top, the first is the No Name Bayou Marsh Creation Project in Southwest Louisiana. This is a QIPR project that CPRA has partnered with NOAA on. It was just awarded to Mike Hook's construction. This is a marsh creation project that's going to build over 430 acres of marsh in Southwest Louisiana. Its estimated cost is roughly $14.7 million. We've got inshore borrow with a sharp pump distance, so we had a lot of good bids there. Really a competitive project, but it's a project that I know we've been talking with Ms. Cormier for a while now, and excited to see that move forward. In addition to that, we have the Ludovine Pump Station project. This is actually a partner-led project by Mr. Bourgeois and the North Lafourche Levee District. Just talked to him this week on an update on that. That is now in construction, just started. That was awarded to Sea-Level Construction. The estimated cost is a little over, almost $7.9 million, and the state is contributing funds in the amount of around $4.8 million to that project. And so as you know, we talk a lot about, we have our state-led projects and we have our partner-led projects where we contribute dollars either through grants or intergovernmental agreements. And so that's an example. This is a 300 CFS pump station that's critical to the system that Mr. Bourgeois operates in North Lafourche. In addition to that, we've talked about over the last couple of months is the really critical Southwest Coastal Storm Risk Management Project. This is the initial pilot project for the non-structural flood risk reduction measures in Southwest Louisiana. The Corps awarded that in the construction of that effort to Wingate Engineers LLC just recently at a cost estimated just below $5 million. And so I know that everyone here, as well as in Ms. Cormier's basin, are excited to see that move forward. We'll be working with the Corps on initiating that project here in the coming weeks. And then we have two critical projects that working on design and we anticipate bidding very soon. The first of those is the Cameron Gulf Shoreline Protection Project. That is another partner-led project by Cameron Parish that the state has contributed funds to. Roughly another mile of shoreline protection to the Rockefeller area, and so working on the design effort there through Cameron Parish, and then hope to bid that within the next 6 months. And then the Bayou Pigeon Boat Launch Project is a project that we should be bidding very soon, definitely within the next 2 months. That is a project in Iberville Parish. It is one of the most widely used boat launches in the Atchafalaya Basin, and we are expanding that boat launch, improving the shoreline, as well as parking. And so it's a critical project. Mr. Lazina and myself had the chance to meet the new parish president, Mr. Chris Daigle, and we'll be kicking that off here in the next few weeks and starting construction on that effort. In addition to construction, want to just give some general updates on engineering and design. As we started this spring, one of those projects we'd like to highlight is the Bird's Foot Delta hydrologic restoration and marsh creation. That project has been undergoing the hydrologic analysis and now working on the engineering alternatives. It's a critical project that we've been working with Wildlife and Fisheries on now for several months. It's funded by NERDA. We're looking at a whole host of alternatives, including beneficial use of dredge material, working with stakeholders and the river pilots as well as the Corps on that effort, looking to potentially increase river flow in the eastern Bird's Foot Delta, and then also beneficially use some of that dredge material to build marsh critical habitat in that area. So we'll be giving more detailed updates, but just wanted to really update the board on this. This is a project funded by the Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group through NERDA. And as we get to the end of the alternatives analysis, we'll provide a more detailed update. So with that, we'll do three projects, update you on those today, and then update the board on some activities that have been going on in CPRA, and then have some more critical updates on some key projects throughout the agenda for today's board meeting. The first is the Grand Isle Dune and Beach Restoration Project. And as you know, a lot of you remember, this is a project that started for the repairs from Hurricane Ida. I know that a lot of the board members know, but this Grand Isle is really an effort that's started in 1976 with the Corps of Engineers through the Grand Isle and vicinity federal authorization, and has been a continuation of that effort since. And so, as we know, Grand Isle was hit very hard during Hurricane Ida and has been recovering ever since. Through that process, Congress appropriated over $122 million for the restoration of the island. Some of that money was used for the immediate emergency repairs, and then eventually the jetty repairs. And now the island has been undergoing the beach and dune construction effort. So if anybody's been to the island recently, you see the pipe on the beach. This work was started in late spring of this year. The Corps of Engineers awarded this construction contract to Callahan Marine. And as you can see in the pictures there, they've laid the pipe across the beach. They're starting on the western end and working eastward. But this is roughly a $50 million project to repair the dune, make critical repairs to the armored core, as well as all of the beach work that'll be ongoing throughout this summer and fall. And so it's a really critical project for the island to continue to provide resiliency for that project. And this is all under that authorization of Grand Isle and vicinity. But we'll continue to update the board as this progresses. The other critical project that we've talked about here recently is the Grand Isle Segmented Breakwaters Project, and wanted to give an update to the board on that. As you know, this is a critical priority for the administration as well as the governor, and so we have been working with the Corps of Engineers to complete the segmented breakwaters on the Gulf shoreline of the island. And so through WRDA of 2022, we're able to provide engineering recommendations to the Corps to work with them on what the Corps calls a PIR, Project Information Report, and that is to try to get authorization for the federal funds to complete that work. It's roughly $40+ million to complete that gap in the segmented breakwaters on the island. We'll be working with them on the flood control and coastal emergencies funding authorization, working through that NEPA process to get that project implemented. We are actually ahead of schedule. We have delivered the report that CPRA has done to the Corps last week, and so we'll be working with them on implementation going forward. But this is obviously a critical priority for the governor. We initiated that really day one and have moved as fast as possible, and we'll continue to do so. Met with the Corps this week on that, and so excited to see that moving, and we'll continue to update the board as we progress. In addition to that, shifting gears is the update on the Lake Barn Marsh Creation Project in St. Bernard Parish. And I know that we've talked a lot about this over the last several months with the annual plan updates, but this is really a phenomenal project. It's quite possibly one of the largest marsh creation projects in the nation, definitely one of the largest projects that CPRA has ever built. And so it's something that we want to update the board on regularly. As you see there, it's the largest ever marsh creation project in the state by acreage, just over 3,000 or 3,100 acres. We are restoring that lake rim of Lake Bourne. And I know that Mr. Lane knows it's critical to not only the habitat here, but also the resiliency of St. Bernard Parish as well as Orleans Parish. And so you can see there the total that we are building right now is 3,180 acres, really a phenomenal amount of work that's going on in that area. It's actually broken up into right now 7 and eventually going to be 8 cells, 8 marsh creation cells. This is another project that's funded by NERDA through the Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group. So we appreciate the hard work that they've done to help us get those restoration plans authored and submitted and approved. But it's roughly $115 million total budget. We're working with Mike Hooks on this construction effort, building those critical projects. I want to show some pictures in construction to highlight the amount of work that's going on. We are both actively building marsh as well as containment dikes. We've got some containment dike footage there, building those containment dikes in some tough geotech soils up to 4.5 feet, and then filling those with material from Lake Bourne that's hydraulically dredged and pumped. You can see there that's some of the marsh buggy work that goes into building these containment dikes and building that perimeter. And then, as you see, that's the process of filling those cells. And so approximately 65% of this project is complete. We've got several, I believe 3 cells completed and working on the other 4 over the next 12 to 18 months to complete this project. But as you can see there, this is one cell that was just recently completed, yet to be planted. You can see that containment dike work there as they're filling that with the hydraulically dredged material from Lake Bourne. This is another footage of them building those containment dikes on one of those marsh creation cells, and eventually that will be filled. What you'll see here, you see we've got a sheet pile closure structure. We've got several areas of either poor geotechnical soils or deeper areas where we couldn't build earthen containment dikes. So oftentimes we'll put sheet pile closures to help in those areas. But I had the good fortune of going out there several weeks ago and seeing the project. I mean, it's just massive. You can see from this picture, this is just one cell of the 3,180 acres. So it's really, really phenomenal. And the state, CPRA, the TIG should be commended for the amount of work that's been done to build one of the largest projects in the nation. So as always, we've got a number of local firms that's working on this. Duplantis Design Group is leading the design with geoengineers, Morris Hebert, Providence, Chenier, and a host of other companies working on this. And then Mike Hooks is leading construction for the dredging work with the help of Lanier and Associates. So a lot of firms involved in this, and really doing a good job supporting the state on this effort. And then kind of the last project or program we wanted to update you on is really a big one that the state has been working on for quite some time, and that is the Mississippi River Reintroduction into Bayou Lafourche project. This is a project that the state has been working on really since 2005, before the inception of CPRA, to get more fresh water essentially down Bayou Lafourche to fight salinity intrusion and wetland loss in Barataria Basin and Terrebonne and Lafourche parishes. And so wanted to update you on this. This is a critical project, like I said, that has been a long time coming. And so as you can see here, really just an overview of the project for the board, just to recap some things we've talked about in the past. This is a project not only for the restoration purposes of fighting salinity intrusion and the amount of marsh that's restored through this project is tens of thousands of acres, but this provides fresh water to a number of parishes: Ascension, Assumption, Lafourche, and Terrebonne, over 300,000 residents. So it's critical. It provides fresh water to two critical energy hubs in Loop and Port Fouchon, as well as Port of Terrebonne. So it's really critical to the state, and so that's the reason why the state has been involved for a number of years with partners at DEQ and others. And so it's really a tremendous effort. That's been a number of projects, as you see here, that have been phased to complete this work. And so it's really a 6-phase project with a number of phases complete. You see there we've got the Union Pacific Railroad crossing, the North Lafourche control structure, the Upper Bayou Lafourche dredging project, as well as the Assumption Parish pedestrian bridge work that's been done, as well as the Thibodeau weir removal. And then we've got a number of projects remaining that I want to update you on. But the critical update today is the work that's going on at the pump station at the Mississippi River and those improvements. And so you can see here, this is roughly a $230 million program. Approximately 65% of this is complete with that $155 million investment that's been made to date. Almost $100 million of that has come from CPRA through CAP dollars and various other measures. We've got roughly 35% of the program left to be funded, roughly $75 million. One of the key initiatives we'll be talking about in the coming months will be funding the sediment trap at the pump station outfall, and then eventually the dredging of the lower Bayou Lafourche to try to be able to get the full capacity of fresh water through the system. And so right now we're trying to get this system up to a 1,500 CFS capacity. And so, as we kind of talk through the next several annual plans, working to try to fund that remaining work to finish this program. So the big update that we have today is the work that the Bayou Lafourche Freshwater District is doing with support from CPRA on the pumping capacity improvements at the Mississippi River. The Bayou Lafourche Freshwater District Executive Director, Dustin Rabelais, is here today, and he's leading that effort. We've got construction ongoing. Sea Level is doing this project. It's roughly a $99 million effort, and they're doing this project. This is a rendering of what that new pump station will look like at the river. It's really going to be a great facility. As you can see from the plan view here, to your left is the Mississippi River. The new pump station is being constructed just north of that existing pump station, and you've got the piping necessary to get it down to Bayou Lafourche, and all the work that's ongoing to get that done. As you can see there at the river, we will eventually have a sediment trap that will help in the maintenance and operation of that new pump station, and that'll be one of the next key initiatives that we'll be funding. But this has been really a critical project, a number of years in the making to get the environmental approvals, the cultural resources approvals, as well as the design done. And so it's good to see that project moving and the construction activity going. You see some of the cofferdam work that's going on at the river, just some pictures of construction as Sea Level continues to make progress on that work. We've got the piping work that's being done as well. You could see that new effort that's going in, and just excited to see all the progress that's being made. As you can see, a number of companies have been involved in this. Locally, we have Sea Level Construction along with a lot of their subs that are doing that work. Stantec, Delta Coast, Baird, and Tetra Tech have led the design as well as construction administration. And then we talk about the economic impacts of these projects. As you can see there, this project alone is supporting over 216 jobs in South Louisiana, not including the government workers. So really tremendous in just this one snapshot to see the economic impacts of these projects. But this project's critical to fighting salinity intrusion and wetland loss in this basin, and so we'll be continuing to work to try to fund the remainder of this program, and wanted you to update on this activity. And then finally, a few updates on some of the good activity we've been doing here at CPRA. As always, we have a lot of interest in our partnership with LSU at the Center for River Studies. Some of our staff was able to work with LSU and other entities to show the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program attendees for young African leaders the great work that we do and educate them through the tour for the LSU Center for River Studies. And so I know that was really phenomenal. Greg Grandy was there to show them all of that that work that we do, and then show them the small scale model. And so I know that that was really interesting for them. And then another opportunity that I had to work with Darren Bossy at the governor's office is to show the Louisiana Governor's Fellows and that program all of the work that we do along the coast, as well as the LSU Center for River Studies. And so we took them on a tour of that facility. And so that never stops. People are really interested in that facility, and so we always take a few minutes to show them that. And then finally, kind of teeing up the next presentation is we have been going on a number of site visits to Chandelier Islands to showcase the key project that we're designing that we'll be talking here about to our stakeholders, the media, and others interested. We had a couple of really successful summer site visits and more to come in the coming months and years, but those are just some footage of the 2 site visits that we were able to conduct this summer, and some of the news articles that came out of it. So really fun to see the interest in this, and excited to kind of turn it over to our technical team to talk to you about that here in the next few minutes. But as always, really excited to connect with the public and stakeholders on the work that we do, and happy to answer any questions from the board.
Okay, any board members, any questions? Any questions? Mr. Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Glenn, for the update. Appreciate it. The Lelutra Ridge and marsh creation, I know the marsh creation aspect of that project has been combined with Lake Bourne.
That's right.
Where are we in the process with the ridge for Lutra? And did it go out to bid, the ridge portion?
I don't know offhand. I'll find out and get back to you. As you mentioned, the marsh creation component will be that 8th cell, which will create the 3,180 acres. But I'll find out where we are at the ridge component.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Garrett.
Yes, sir. So forgive me if you covered this, but the Bayou Pigeon boat launch, what was the funding source for that?
I believe it's surplus and capital outlay. I can get back to you on the, it's state-only dollars, and I'll get back to you on that exact amount. It's roughly $1.6 million in construction funding.
Great. Anything that it enhances recreational use is a great thing. Second question, so the Bird's Foot Delta project is undergoing the alternatives analysis right now. Do we have a timeline for construction and implementation on that?
Not yet. We right now we have engineering design dollars only, so it'll be a funding schedule-driven situation. But we'll work with the project team and get those details to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Any other questions? Ms. Cormier. Okay.
All right, thank you for your presentation. Congratulations on the Lake Bourne marsh creation. It goes into my mission, which is 100% beneficial use of dredge material. So great job. I do have a question about the containment dikes. This question was brought up last night at the Chenier Plain board meeting. I know you normally take down the containment dikes once the marsh is sustained, but my question is it possible to leave it for one growing season so that it can really be sustained before you tear them down? I don't know what the time frame is in taking down the containment dikes, and that pretty much is my question. What is the time frame? And if it's in like a couple of months after it's finished, if we could wait one growing season to do that, to let it establish.
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah, every project's slightly different. Sometimes we gap the containment dikes and don't fully degrade them. And a lot of times they are left for an extended period of time to let them stabilize before they're degraded. And so every project's slightly different. The site that I visited on Lake Bourne, the containment dikes had just been degraded and they had been there for quite some time. So I think in these particular cases, they are left for a growing season. Thank you.
Okay, President Jewell.
Thank you. Glenn, as always, thanks for the update. I noticed on the way in that there's some significant progress on PO 75, the LaBranche Wetlands
Yes.
project. I just want to see at the next meeting if we can make sure to have an update in there for that project as well, since they're on a critical phase of the dredging portion.
Yep, I'll definitely do that. I saw the pipeline out there as well.
Okay, with that, the board is cleared, and Mr. Dave, we thank you, and, I want to give a shout out to Glenn, since he's taken executive director's position, and he's really taken the ball, ran with it, done a wonderful job, and we thank you for keeping on top of everything.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for the board. Thank you.
Okay, the next one is the restoration of Chandelier Islands. Rudy Semino, CPRA, Matt Weigel with Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. Gentlemen.
Chairman, Board, thank you for having me.
Please state your name.
I'm Matthew Weigel with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and I'm going to give you all an update on the engineering design progress we made in the Chandelier Island Restoration Project, talk a little bit about purpose and need, and Rudy's going to lead us on a CMAR discussion following that. The purpose of the project is to restore habitat, basically. The funding for engineering design has come from Deepwater Horizon, NERDA, region-wide bird restoration dollars, so bird habitat's definitely a focus of the project. But as well, we're also looking to restore our marine seagrasses out there. The Chandelier Islands are the location of Louisiana's only marine seagrass beds, and they're quite significant. We're also looking at protecting and restoring sea turtle nesting habitat. It was not well known that Louisiana even had sea turtle nesting habitat until our project began and our survey efforts began, and we discovered quite a bit of activity out there, so that's definitely an important part of the project as well. And we're also looking at restoring other habitats and resources out there at the Chandeliers. It's a big project, so we've got a lot of partners. The Deepwater Horizon region-wide TIG is involved in the project, as well as the Louisiana TIG, of course, and the Restore Council as well as a host of NGO partners and others helping us with the project. We also have universities involved and other agencies that aren't represented here. And as many of you know that may have come out on one of our recent site visits, the Chandelier Islands are quite remote. This map shows that they're quite a distance from Louisiana's coast and population centers. More often than not, they're more easily accessed from Biloxi. But it is a challenge to the project, but it's something we can overcome. A little information on the significance of the Chandelier Islands. The Chandelier Islands are our largest barrier island. Our project site is over 13 miles in length. That's quite a large project area. But those islands are first line of defense against hurricanes for several population centers, and also some very sensitive habitats landward of those islands. It's the second oldest national wildlife refuge in the country. It was established in 1904 as a wildlife refuge by Teddy Roosevelt, our conservation president. And those guys back then understood the significance of the Chandelier Islands to nesting birds and other wildlife. And it might have inspired the National Wildlife Refuge program even. It's also the only wilderness area in Louisiana. It was designated in 1970s as a federal wilderness area, and it has additional protections there as well. Some more about Chandler Island's significance. Has the most diverse assemblage of marine seagrasses, the only assemblage of marine seagrasses in Louisiana, but the most diverse in the Northern Gulf. There are 5 species of marine seagrasses found in the Northern Gulf, and Chandler Islands is the only place where all 5 species can be found. It was once the largest colonial nesting bird site in the world. It's currently the island chain is the largest colonial nesting bird area in the Northern Gulf. That's mostly due to loss of habitat from erosion that we've lost our spot as the top spot in the world. But the island is very important to a host of species. There's 79 species of greatest conservation need that our agency recognizes as needing restoration efforts, rely on the chandelures at some part in their life cycle. Also, species of global importance are found there. And this is a rare opportunity for the team to accomplish that whole ecosystem restoration. I mentioned the size of the project. Chandler Islands is kind of shown here relative to some other barrier islands and project sites. And one of our alternative overlays is visible on the island, and you can see the scale of the project is quite large. As far as some of those species the islands are significant to, birds are a large one. Hundreds of thousands of birds rely on the Chandler Islands each year. That's not just, it's a huge bird nesting area. Like I said, the largest in the Northern Gulf of Mexico, but it's also important forage and habitat for a lot of migratory species, important stopover and wintering habitat. Just this past winter, we had over 100,000 waterfowl counted there, utilizing the seagrass meadows of Chandeleur Island. 38 avian species of greatest conservation need rely on those islands. 2 federally listed species utilize it for wintering and stopover habitat, and that's the piping plover and the red knot pictured on the right-hand side of that slide. And you can see those birds are wearing some jewelry on their legs. They're very important species, and they're studied heavily. It's also very important to sea turtle nesting. These are some photographs we took during our nesting surveys. You'll see a nesting crawl on your left. A crawl are the tracks that a turtle leaves in the sand when they come out to nest on the beaches. You'll see a Kemp's hatchling we photographed, as well as a female Kemp's we caught a picture of nesting on the island during a flight. But as I mentioned, it's the only sea turtle nesting location in Louisiana. There's 3 species nesting there. Loggerhead sea turtles. We discovered green sea turtles as well last year, 1 or 2 crawls of greens. And it's very important for the Kemp's Ridley. It was thought that Kemp's only nested in the Western Gulf, the extreme Western Gulf. But through our surveys, we found that the Chandler Islands are a significant island for Kemp's Ridley nesting. And we've been doing some genetic analysis with the University of Georgia, and it looks like we may have a distinct population of Kemp's. That's not completely confirmed yet, but that will be very important to recovery of the species. That species is still in need. It's the most endangered sea turtle in the world. As I mentioned earlier, we have large seagrass meadows, our only seagrass meadows, very diverse meadows. It's the largest assemblage of seagrasses in the Northern Gulf, roughly 5,200 acres. And we've got some early pioneer species like shoal grass and widgeon grass out there, but we also have the rarer, the old growth species, if you will, of seagrasses, that being turtle grass and stargrass, very important, very high quality habitat that's threatened as the island erodes. And here's an image of our recent seagrass survey showing the extent. But in some areas, those seagrass meadows can extend 1.5 miles from the backside of the island. They offer the island a lot of protection. This project, we won't need rocks on the backside because we have the protection of the seagrass meadows, which is unusual for a lot of our barrier islands where we don't have that habitat. And also, those seagrass meadows are excellent habitat for a host of species, threatened and endangered species, but a lot of recreational species as well. These are some recent photos. It was a real good year for speckled trout down at the Chandeleurs. And that's one thing we're doing this year is doing some vessel surveys and some fisherman surveys, trying to get an idea of the impact, the economic impact Chandeleurs has. And on any given day, we can see over 100 fishermen fishing the waters around our project site on the Chandeleur Seagrass Meadows. Very important area for recreational fishermen, very important area to the charter fishing industry for the economies of Louisiana and Mississippi as well. And we also receive from funding, some funding from the Restore Council to make a video that highlights the significance of the islands as well as the need for restoration of the islands. And I'm going to play that for you guys now.
In the Gulf of Mexico, at the easternmost tip of Louisiana, the Chandeleur Islands form the very first line of defense for the rapidly diminishing coastlines of both Louisiana and Mississippi. But over the course of the past century, more than 89% of the island's acreage has disappeared, leaving the delicate coastal ecosystems of the mainland vulnerable. Formed over 2,000 years ago, this narrow arc of sediment and sand spans nearly 50 miles from end to end and provides a crucial habitat for a multitude of plant and animal species. As part of the Breton National Wildlife Refuge, the second oldest refuge in the country, this remote barrier island wilderness and its inhabitants are federally protected. To the casual observer, they may appear to be somewhat static, but over time, the ebb and flow of the tides has ever so slowly reshaped these islands. This cycle of erosion and accretion is a natural part of the life of barrier islands, as they play their part in protecting the inner wetlands from the impact of ocean waves, the intrusion of salt water, and the damaging effects of storm surges. But the ferocity and frequency of recent hurricanes has greatly diminished the island's ability to rebuild themselves. In addition to the devastating effects of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, the islands were hit hard by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010. Their close proximity to the spill resulted in frequent and repeated oiling impacts, further compounding the rate of their deterioration. And now, the Chandeleur Islands are vanishing at an alarming pace, leaving numerous species of plants and animals in a state of decline. In fact, nowhere else in Louisiana can such a vast number of species in the greatest need of conservation be found. The abundance and diversity of the plant and animal life on the islands is not a matter of chance. As with all valuable real estate, location is everything. Nearly 25 miles offshore, these uninhabited islands provide an ideal sanctuary for fish and wildlife. Furthermore, their central location allows them to play a pivotal role in maintaining biodiversity by serving as a habitat linkage between the eastern and western regions of the Gulf, promoting the health of the entire Gulf Coast and attracting an impressive variety of marine species, the most varied and abundant of which can be found just beneath the surface. Seagrass. As the only marine seagrass meadow in Louisiana, it is among the most diverse assemblage of marine grasses found anywhere in the entire Gulf of Mexico. These meadows make ideal habitats for wildlife and fisheries, providing shelter and sustenance for a myriad of marine creatures. Of the many varieties of grasses, one stands out from the rest, not necessarily for its visual attraction, but for what it attracts. Known as the old-growth forest of seagrasses, this turtle grass is an essential foraging ground for loggerhead, green, and Kemp's Ridley turtles, the most endangered species of sea turtle on the planet. just the past 2 years, 108 sea turtle crawls were documented across the islands. This is thought to be a dramatic underestimation of the island's total nesting potential. But these are not the only rare animals that nest here, nor are they the most abundant. Collectively, the Chandeleur Islands host some 215,000 nesting birds each year. This is the largest nesting site in the entire state. Its location and warm climate also make it an ideal wintering ground for migratory red knots, redhead ducks, piping plovers, and an array of other species. And each winter, they arrive by the tens of thousands. As critical as this habitat may be for its seasonal visitors, for the Chandeleur gull, it is absolutely essential. A reproductively viable hybrid of kelp and herring gulls, this endemic species nests nowhere else on Earth. But in the span of only a few decades, the Chandeleur gull population has plummeted from approximately 100 birds in the 1990s to just 24 documented sightings in 2023. Make that 28. Captured here on film for the very first time, these 4 chicks could be among the final generations of Chandeleur gulls on the planet. Though scientists once estimated that the islands would stand for several centuries to come, the latest models predict that without a concerted, large-scale restoration, many of the Chandeleur Islands will be underwater in just a few decades. But all hope is not lost. As part of Louisiana's 50-year coastal master plan, a large-scale barrier island maintenance project to restore this invaluable coastal ecosystem is already underway. Although engineering and design plans are slated to be complete by 2025, funding for the construction of the project, which will exceed $200 million, has yet to be identified. As we confront the realities of our changing environment, we must adapt and work together to restore and preserve our coastal ecosystems, safeguarding the future of the entire Gulf Coast for generations to come.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Rudy Semino, Chief of Engineering at CPRA. Matt was able to provide you with pictures of baby turtles and nice videos. I'm going to give you an engineering update now, so hopefully you guys can bear with me. So thank you very much. Matt mentioned this is a rare opportunity for whole ecosystem restoration. So what I want to do for today is provide you exactly what we're doing, what we're proposing to do. So we kicked off the design process at the back end of 2021 in a phase 1. So we felt we had a lot of upfront homework to do, so we broke the design contract into 2 phases. And you can see in that phase 1, we were able to kind of conceive some project features, do some design scoping, review existing data. There was a lot of data, a lot of modeling efforts out there that fit into the full design. And then we were able to establish great partnerships. Matt showed you that slide with all the participating entities on the project. It's somewhat of a rallying cry, if you will, to start the restoration effort on this project. We kicked off phase 2 in the second quarter of 2023, which is where we're at today. We're actually on the 3rd bullet. We're completing the 3rd bullet as we speak, the alternative development and analysis. We'll fold into permitting, actually fully design the chosen alternative, final design, and then our goal is to head to construction in towards the end of 2025. So when we look at those alternatives, as I mentioned, we are currently at the alternatives analysis phase. When we look at those alternatives, we always compare the future with no action. And as Matt mentioned and the video mentioned, within the next several decades, if we don't do anything, the Chandeleur Islands will no longer be there in its current form. would be a big impact to the habitat as well as to the marshes, the Biloxi marshes, which are on the eastern fringe of St. Bernard Parish. It is a quite large land mass. The entire island is 50 miles, but the part that we're restoring is 13 miles. And if you've ever been to it, it definitely has an impact on the actual day-to-day wave activity that's coming from the east. So we'll scroll through these alternatives, and one thing that you will note is every alternative I show you, all four that I show you, the remaining three that I show you, will have the beach and dune restoration feature, which is the blue polygon that's on the beach side of the island, as well as the orange feature on the right side of the screen, which is a bird habitat restoration feature at New Harbor Island. This is something similar to what we saw at Queen Bess and Rabbit Island, and what we're about to start on the H&C Bird Island. This is a pelican rookery. This will be a complete restoration of that island in terms of pumping sand to regain elevation, as well as putting forth critical shoreline protection around that island to prevent erosion from all sides. So every alternative that we analyzed had the complete beach and dune restoration as well as that feature. And you can see this particular alternative 2, focus on what we call sand reservoirs, which are those red polygons distributed through the island. And this was an opportunity to build a marsh-like feature with sand that would actually continue to nourish the backside of the island, some of the other marsh features. So it's almost like a deposit of sand that was intentionally designed to continue to nourish it for the long term. Alternative 3 is somewhat similar. We actually created true marsh in this alternative in current open water areas. You can see the beach and dune restoration there as well. And you can see most of these alternatives approach the $300 million price tag, which is kind of our goal for budget at this point. And then alternative 4 actually removes the marsh features and actually puts what we call a feeder beach in purple there towards the middle of the island. This is somewhat of a feature that would be advanced placement of material beyond the beach. And there is a nodal point, so longshore sediment drift actually moves north and south there in both directions. So that actual deposit of sand would feed the island to the north and to the south over an extended period of time. So it's almost like a preventative maintenance feature to place sand there. And then one thing we are looking at is a hybrid of several of these alternatives that could move forward and what that might cost. But right now, we're looking at these 3 alternatives for restoration to make a decision coming up in the next several months, probably towards the back end of this year, as we advance one of these alternatives to final design. Matt mentioned or talked about a lot of environmentally sensitive species and habitats on the Chandeleur Island. And it is truly an environmental sanctuary, a unique place. But that does provide some construction challenges as we go to construct this project. So we're already looking forward to that late 2025 date as to how we would write specifications and bid documents as to how we might construct this. And that really causes a lot of challenges. So one of the things we looked at is rather than your traditional design bid build, which I can tell you most of the projects the agency has delivered has been that you basically have an engineer design a project, he puts it out for public bid, and the lowest responsive and responsible bidder gets the job. That's how most of the projects Mr. Leday mentioned earlier, as well as most of the other projects we work on, have been done in that manner. If you go to the right side of the screen, you see what we call a design build model, which you see a lot of other agencies like DOTD do a lot of work in this particular way, is when you actually hire a design builder. That's an engineer and a contractor all on the same team. So you put forth a request for proposals, you actually have a preliminary design, put that out on the street, and then you would have a design build team, which has an engineer and a contractor team together, bid on that together. So all the design risk, all the contracting risk goes to that team. And then over the past couple of decades, we have seen a hybrid of these 2 models come around, known as construction management at risk, where an owner actually hires a designer or engages a designer to design the project, and then engages a contractor, known as a CMOR in this case, to become a part of the design team and provide construction input and costs during the design process. The designer and the contractor are not contractually obligated to one another. They actually remain independent, and the owner manages both entities with a spirit of partnership throughout the design process. So after looking at all the models, this is the one we are proposing to move forward for the Chandelier project. This slide tells you the primary reasons why we're looking at that. We do anticipate multiple phases of construction on this project, primarily due to the way the money will flow. There's several pots of money in play here. The first would be available in that late 2025 timeframe. Our goal, just given the things that you saw in the video and that Matt presented, we want to start restoring habitat as soon as possible. So our goal would be to actually extract a component of the project that has been completely designed and allow that to move forward. We could do this in the normal design build manner. However, that could potentially have multiple contractors working on the same site, which could be a bit of a problem when construction comes around. That's the second bullet. The third bullet, I think, is key here because as engineers, I think we're not doing anything we haven't done before. We're pumping sand onto an island to rebuild a beach and dune and marsh. However, because of some of the habitat restraints that we have here, turtle nesting areas, bird nesting areas. We do want some contractor input as to how he may or how he or she may build that. What's the best manner, most cost-effective manner to do that? With a Seymour model, you get that input during design. The engineering team can actually design features that the contractor is comfortable with. You don't necessarily see that. Those of us who have worked on public works projects know contractors and engineers never agree. So this is an opportunity to get that agreement during the design process and actually move forward with that in the contract. We could see a potential savings on mobilization, dredge pipeline installation, booster pumps. All of that could potentially result in cost savings. And then we get a great opportunity to get the most qualified and experienced dredging contractor on this job. We'll talk a little bit about how we hire that. So what processes have we undergone to get to where we're at today to recommend the construction management at-risk model? So for about the past year, we've done some outreach. The dredging industry is a pretty small industry, and they kind of have their way of doing things. And alternative delivery models aren't something that you normally would see, particularly in Louisiana with that group. So we did a lot of outreach explaining why, if we were to go this route, why we may do that and what reasons. And it's the reasons I listed on the previous slide. Western Dredging Association, the Louisiana Association of General Contractors, American Society of Civil Engineers, and we've actually discussed Seymour for Chandelier at our Coastal Industry Day as well. So we've done the legwork to get the buy-in from the contracting community in an effort to not somewhat broadside them with this solicitation as we roll it out. And then you see the timing there. That's actually directly from the law, the second section there. The law does require us to bring this contractor on board before the completion of the 30%, which currently we would be able to obtain if we were to put this thing out pretty soon. So the process, the law does require you to develop a qualifications-based solicitation. So it's not a cost-based. There is no cost component to this solicitation. It's all qualifications-based, project experience, personnel experience, approach, things of that nature. It does require you to put forth that scope as well as the grading criteria, the fee, and the actual construction cost. That all has to be laid out. And then we, as CPRA, will establish a selection review committee, which is pretty common. However, in the Seymour law, it does actually have requirements as to what that committee will look like. So it has to be an engineer in the discipline but not involved in the project, a licensed contractor in the discipline but not involved in the contract, a representative of CPRA, and 2 members at large. So at least 2 of these people do not work for CPRA. They represent the design community and they represent the contracting community. One thing to note in terms of contracts, there are 2 distinct contracts in the Seymour process. When we put the solicitation out, the contractor will put forth the proposal. We will select them. They will come on in a pre-construction contract. That's just a contract for the design phase involvement. If they give us a good price that we like and that meets our budget, we will then execute the construction phase contract. So there's a little bit of a negotiation to get to that point. You can see there, they are to provide cost estimates at the 60 and 90% design phase. So we're getting visibility on what this project will look like from a cost standpoint. In addition to cost, they're providing means and methods, constructability, their schedule, all of these things that allow us to get a little bit of certainty in what this project may look like when it does go to construction. And then you see there, once we complete design, which would be in the fourth quarter of 2025, we have cost estimates from the contractor. We've got designs from the engineers and concurrence on those designs from the contractor. We will then execute or negotiate a guaranteed maximum price for the construction of the contract. A lot of words on this slide, but I'll summarize the first bullet. If we like that number and we're good on the numbers, we execute a construction contract. If we don't like that number and we can't come to terms on what that looks like, we will then terminate the Seymour contract and then put the project out for bid. The regular design bid build manner. Low bid gets the job. The law was updated in 2018. That unsuccessful Seymour in this case would be prohibited from bidding on that job. So that does provide you with a bit of a stick to get to that good price. You're basically telling him you can't come to terms on this cost. You're out. That's a good part of the law there. One thing that's unique here, and I think is one of the reasons we like this model for the Chandeleur Islands, is we kind of speak as if it's a big package, one giant contract. We do have the opportunity to break that giant contract into smaller contracts. So I mentioned if we do get funds, we do anticipate a substantial amount of funds in the late 2025 timeframe, but some funds would be maybe a year or more later. We can actually execute a smaller GMP package and have the contractor go start on that work while we continue to design and pursue funds for the remaining components. Also, as I mentioned, there are many habitat windows. We know of the bird rookery to pelican habitat window between September and February. There could be additional restrictions such as that. That would allow us to almost execute a stop-go plan for the contractor without having to see that downtime cost that you would see in a normal project. Next steps, we drafted the RFQ package, request for qualifications package. That is currently undergoing its final review. The next step here is to advertise that. That will likely go on advertisement for a period of 45 to 60 days. We will receive the statements of qualifications and or proposals, review, rank, and then ultimately we want to engage that Seymour integrate that Seymour contractor into the project team before the completion of the 30%. That's where we're at today. So I do think that's my last slide. I do want to kind of acknowledge Todd Baker, who couldn't be here today. He's our project manager. He's worked very hard to get us where we're at today. We got a lot of momentum on this project. We have an energized project team. A couple of my staff are here, Bevan Barringer and Olivia Creel, who work on the engineering side. We've got a great partnership with Wildlife and Fisheries as well as many other agencies. We're looking forward to delivering this project for the CPRA, and I think we're on the right track. So with that, myself and Matt will take any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Any questions? About President Jewell.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's a great idea to do a CMAR on this project. We, in St. Charles Parish, we're actually in the process of doing a CMAR project on a pump station, and there's many benefits to it. We're having a good experience. I've talked to other parishes who have done CMARs who have not had a good experience, and most of those circle around after the selection of the contractor may be a little hands-off during the design process. So the one, tip that I can give you just from speaking with some of the other parishes and people who've done CMAR projects is please make sure that your contractor is hands-on during that design process, that they're giving their technical expertise so that there's no finger pointing in the end. But at the end of the day, they do have to sign off that they agree with everything, and then that hopefully will limit change orders in the future.
I certainly appreciate that, President Jewell. We'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Mr. Bourgeois.
Yeah, good presentation, guys. Obviously, we got a need. Funding is working there. I saw on the list of partners on this, we had the state of Texas, we had Alabama, and the state of Florida, as well as Mississippi. It seems like Mississippi in particular has got a lot of vested interest in this project, and I was wondering if you could speak towards what they contributed or what they should contribute or what we might need from these adjacent states that we should be addressing here.
Yeah, we're still putting together funding for the project, so there's some unknowns there on, what we'll receive from various pots of money. But those states were on that slide representing the Restore Council, and we do have an ask with the Restore Council for some of that funding. And I see Mr. Leday there.
To answer your question as well, Dwayne, is that we were yesterday in New Orleans presenting to the Restore Council in all of those states to try to get some of that competitive funding. So we're asking them to contribute some of that through Bucket $2 and a variety of other means. But it's primarily through that Restore Council relationship that we're asking them to contribute. And as you said, particularly Mississippi, working with MDEQ and Chris Wells there to try to get them to contribute because it means a lot to their state. And that's a good point.
Yeah, we saw the charter boat sitting out there coming out of, and you've said that you're accessing it out of Biloxi. It would seem like, we've got our CPRA and our wildlife and fisheries that their groups could contribute in any way, shape, or form. It would be helpful to us as well.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, and our staff was there yesterday presenting, had a really good presentation, and they're actually again there today presenting additional work on this project to the Restore Council.
Good deal. Thank you.
And Glenn, and like you just said, is we are going after competitive funding, which is a whole different line of funding, so that which we need them on board with. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Garrett.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to commend the whole ecosystem restoration. I think that's great. You all obviously are getting lots of pots of money together. You're building synergies. You're building efficiencies. I think that's a really good approach, and this is obviously a very good project. Kind of piggybacking on the price tag for construction, it was mentioned we don't know where those construction dollars are going to come from. Sounds like y'all plan to hit the ground running in 2025, so evidently we've identified some. What's the delta here? What's the gap? What are we missing for later construction dollars?
I think the first pot of money is going to come from Louisiana Tech, from NERDA. So we have some degree of certainty on that. We don't have the exact numbers of what that might look like. It'll be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. As you saw, we set a goal with $300 million. I think that's a pretty solid number right now. We have a large degree of confidence. Obviously, Glenn said there was a presentation yesterday on some restore dollars. So I think right now, at least as we sit, we're sitting in the range of 250 to 300 with the opportunity to go up. So.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Any other questions? Here, no. Oh, excuse me, Ms. Cormier.
Gentlemen, thank you for your presentation. I love the Seymour process. I think it's a great idea to get everybody on board at the beginning. Some of the lessons learned have been utilized by you guys having new ideas and new ways to do things. And I really commend you guys for really stepping outside and looking at the whole project. What I can say about I was involved in the CAP project for Rabbit Island, and one of the things we ran into was the sunset of the CAP program and the nesting bird no-go on the island, which was, like you said, from September to February. I just want to express out loud that I think it's so important to have that stop-go point on the contract, because if the birds are a no-go from September to February and the turtles are a no-go from August to whatever their nesting time is, then we're going to have a problem and construction costs are going to keep going up. So great idea on the stop-go, great presentation, excited about this project, hope you find all the money in the world, and maybe you can add a few rocks out there too, and then we can say rocket, rocket, rocket. Yeah, great job.
Thank you, Ms. Cormier.
Okay, Mr. Davidson. Right.
There we go. Can you guys talk about, the benefits of breaking the engineering and design up into two phases, and, what's that going to allow y'all to do moving forward?
Sure. So when we hit the ground running in 21, we knew we basically had a one-sheet map of what we wanted to do with the project. We knew it was beach restoration somewhere in the Chandler Islands. Not a lot of detail there. So what the phase one allowed us to do was actually hire a design firm, Coastal Engineering Consultants, who have been a great partner here, and actually go through the volumes of existing data on the Chandler Island, the history, things that had been done in the past, potential sand sources, all of these things that we want to spend a little bit of time on kind of before we dove right into detailed design. Looking at the funding prospects, looking at the permitting restrictions, forming partnerships. Partnerships with the wildlife and fisheries, of course, but the federal agencies have been critical here because we do think that will allow the regulatory process to go a lot smoother. So I think it was money well spent and time well spent. It was a very short period of time, but we accomplished a lot, and it allowed us to have a little bit more figured out as we dove into detailed design. So it's not something we do on every project, but when we deal with things as complex as this, I do think it paid off.
And, one other thing, I'd highly encourage y'all to look into different pots of funding within Department of Interior. Recently, this being a wildlife refuge and wilderness area, there's a lot of opportunity with restoration of those areas through the Great American Outdoors Act and the deferred maintenance backlog that the Department of Interior has. I believe this would qualify, so highly encourage y'all to look into that as an opportunity.
Appreciate that, Mr. Davidson. Thank you.
President Jewell.
Thank you. So I'm looking at all the alternatives here. You have, obviously, one is no action, right? And that's not really an option, right? So the second one, you'll have the sand reservoirs that I think are highlighted in like that orange color. On alternative 3, you have the, pocket marshes, which I guess are highlighted there in yellow. And then the last one is the feeder beach. 90% of this project, 90% of all of these alternatives are all the same, right? The main shoreline, the back area, that small New Harbor Island. Have y'all looked at the cost? Can you just do all of these? Can you do like the feeder beach, the marshes, and the sand deposits? What's the cost of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't necessarily costed it. That is one of the things I mentioned, that hybrid alternative. So one of the maybe benefits of a Seymour model is we don't necessarily have to have that all figured out right now. We know, like you said, 90% of the features are all the same. The rest of them are where else you want to put sand. Perhaps if we were to engage a Seymour contractor, have him start on that core beach dune template, additional funds were to come, we just go ahead and design that and have him continue working. So I do think you would potentially see this thing grow to 350, possibly even closer to 400 if you were to combine them all. And whether or not the funding prospects for that are there, I don't know. But we are looking at, hey, maybe there's a alternative 3A, call it, where you have all of these things on the template. I think there's some opportunity there, maybe not everything, but definitely more.
Yeah, I'm not a ecologist or anything, and assuming all of these different features could work together, I'd be interested to know what the cost would be of all of them.
Yeah, I think as we get into, like I said, the detailed design, it's going to be some variety of alternative 3, which is, generally a lot of marsh and a whole island beach dune restoration, a dune up to +8 with a substantial beach. Where else we put sand becomes almost kind of like an extra effort beyond that if funding were to come in place. We could engage that contractor while we have him under contract, execute another package, have him build it. But that's a great point. That's exactly where our minds are right now.
Okay, and Mr. Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rudy, and I guess maybe for Glenn here as well, but just want to think outside the box a little bit when it comes to funding. So later in the year of next year for the Super Bowl, the eyes of the world is going to be on us. And I think a marketing campaign, when you show turtles and everything else, they could potentially, some kind of campaign around that, they could be somebody out the woodworks from God knows where, somewhere around the world. I just think we ought to start thinking, getting in that mindset, and this would be a wonderful project to do that with. So I really appreciate it. And I also want to thank you for the invite for to go for the site. Sorry, couldn't make it.
Yeah, Mr. Leday.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. You have a great idea. In fact, our communications director suggested something similar. So we're certainly on the same page there. I think it's a great opportunity. And just, for the sake of the board, we're trying to find all the possible funding avenues for this project. We've identified at least 5 different funding sources, and we think we have a really good chance of getting those. And so whether it's through TIG, whether it's through NERDA, variety of the NERDA sources there, as well as Restore and some grant opportunities. But to your point, I think you're right. We do need to do a marketing campaign, particularly around the Super Bowl, and this could be one of those avenues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with that, no more questions. Mr. Semino and Mr. Weigel, thank you very much. Very informative, and we keep it expediting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, the next one is the basin updates. Calcasieu, Sabine, Basin land loss. Leah Ann Sharp with CPRA. Ms. Sharp, please state your name.
Excuse me. Yes, I'm Leanne Sharp from CPRA. I'm from the our Lafayette Regional Office, where I manage data collection for the CRIMS monitoring network coastwide. And also our group does some marsh management. We operate the structures along Calcasieu Lake, and so the insights that I'm going to share come from the CRIMS data and from trying to manage water level in the Calcasieu-Sabine Basin. So quickly, what we're going to go through is a quick data review. We're going to look at land change, our last land change analysis from CRIMS sites. I'm going to show you that the Calcasieu-Sabine Basin is an emerging land loss hotspot. We're going to look at the issues, the reasons why. A lot of it appears to have to do with an acceleration in sea level rise and an increase in flooding associated with that. And then we'll look at some site examples from CRIM sites that did lose land in that event. And then we'll think through some potential solutions. So at CPRA, our monitoring is within operations, and it's all really happening at the field office level. We're monitoring land change and the processes associated with land loss. So that means that we're comprehensively monitoring land change, hydrology, vegetation, how it changes, sediment accumulation, accretion, elevation change, soils, and then we have some additional data sets as needed for specific projects, nutrients, biomass, submerged aquatics. We map shorelines. We've got a lot of data. And so the coastwide reference monitoring system that I'm going to show you it's a comprehensive coastwide network, and it allows us to analyze data at multiple scales. From the site scale to a project, we can assess basins and we can assess coastwide because of the way that the sites were randomly distributed. The data, the first analysis that kind of highlights some of the issues I'm going to show you here are featured in the 2019 basin report that we put out. That's available in SIMS. So this is Louisiana's coastwide reference monitoring system. We've got almost 400 stations coastwide that are all measuring the same things at the same time. So we're getting hourly water level, salinity, annual vegetation, accretion, elevation change, and pairing it with land loss or land change to kind of figure out what's going on and help guide restoration. It's a publicly available data set brought to us by CPRA. We should all shake CPRA's hands when you get a chance and thank them for the monitoring data because it's publicly available. It's certainly useful for CPRA projects, but it's also useful for things like this. So the land change data I'm gonna focus on is what we collect at our sites. So each CRIM site has a 1 kilometer area around it that is used for spatial analysis, for land change analysis. We get data from satellites. That's that chart on the right where we can capture trends And then we have a more precise classification that USGS does with sub-meter data where they classify land and water at each site and point out what changed when, and we can kind of get at processes a bit. So this is initial land at CRIM sites. So this is percent land, meaning the amount of land within the 1 kilometer area, which that's 247 acres. So that's percent land at that scale. Because of the way the network's designed, with enough statistical power and randomization, it really does capture the landscape as it sat. So in 2005, you had less land at sites initially in the more fragmented parts of the coast. Interior areas were largely intact. So this is land change over the CRIM's time. Our last land change analysis, our last site level analysis is from 2021. We do see ongoing land loss on the lower deltaic plain. Basically on this map, the triangles that are red and purple and pointing down, that's land loss. The ones that are blue and green and pointing up, that's land gain. All those circles that are gray and white aren't really changing. The gray ones have lost less than 10%. The white ones have gained up to 10%. So it's interesting, just looking at this, there's ongoing land loss on the lower deltaic plain. There's a lot of stability inland, even through 2021, and that's post-Ida. But what's surprising is the land loss on the Cheniere Plain. The Calcasieu-Sabine Basin has kind of destabilized, and the land loss we see there is at the same scale as lower deltaic plain land loss. And, that was surprising to us. It's offensive to me, but it's fixable. So the fundamental problem there, it's hurricanes are causing a lot of the damage, but the destabilization aligns with an increase in sea level rise. So this is Galveston data back to 1950. Galveston's a reliable Cheniere Plain ocean gauge. And so Galveston is up 1.5 feet above where it was in the 60s when Calcasieu-Sabine infrastructure was designed and installed. And that chart to the right shows just the variability. It's detrended. That bold line going through it is a 5-year moving average. And that kind of helps you see the previous cycles of relatively low water followed by relatively high water. We were at relatively low water from the 90s until just recently. And then there's an acceleration that starts about 2011. It shot up. It really kind of came home to roost here in 2015 and 16. And that's when we saw the landscape change. So this is another look at water level. That blue, these are annual means. That blue line is Calcasieu Pass. That's another good Cheniere Plain sea level guide. And then that green line is the average of all the sites in the Calcasieu-Sabine Basin. And so you can see it tracks sea level precisely at this scale. It tracks pretty well because whatever the Gulf is, that's minimum water level. Like Gulf water level is as low as it gets, and then it stacks. And water in Calcasieu Lake and Sabine Lake is even higher. And then the water in the marshes that drain into those lakes are even higher. And so you can only really get down to sea level. And looking at this, that chart at the bottom is the drought monitor data. I know it's hard to see, but it is a thing that we get relatively high water and high rainfall in the same years, and we get low water and drought in the same years. And so we've just kind of come out of a major drought. If you compare drought minimum to drought minimum, the Gulf is up 0.3 feet, but inside the Calcasieu-Sabine Basin, it's up 0.6 feet. Because a little bit of a small change in sea level in these managed basins that have to drain into the lake and then to get back down to Gulf level, it adds up exponentially as you go inland. So the site I want to focus on is in the CS20 project area. And so that's the East Mud Lake project area. That's a Quipper project from PPL 2. I cut my teeth in East Mud Lake. I learned to drive an airboat at East Mud Lake. And it's gone, basically. It destabilized as soon as sea level went up. And so talking to the landowner out there and looking back at it, it was a successful project. It was a 20-year Quipper project. It was successful hydrologic restoration. At the end of 20 years, we tuned up the structures, gave them back to the landowner. He continued to implement that operations plan. But when water got as high as it did, it was coming over the levees from the west and from the south and was unmanageable. There was nothing that he could do with his infrastructure to control it at that point, and that's when it destabilized. So this is the site. This is CRIM 672. It's inside that CS20 project area. It's kind of the poster child for this type of land loss. You can see from the satellite based land change trend analysis there at the bottom right that it destabilizes basically 2016, 2017, that it went pretty quick. That's it was 56% land there at the bottom left in 2015. By 2018, a lot of it was gone. 2021, most of it was gone. And so that's not from a hurricane, that's just a loss of hydrologic control. I think this is the most extreme, but we see similar issues west of there, particularly on Sabine Refuge. Zooming out to the basin and looking at the issue at the basin scale, what you've got is kind of water level that's become unmanageable. So if you think about, when and why infrastructure was constructed, you've got ship channels. The ship channels, it's basically surrounded by salt water, and that's just a fact of life in that part of the world. And so all of that marsh management infrastructure is essentially to control water level and salinity and be able to grow, saltwater vegetation or intermediate brackish vegetation. And it worked. Like if you look at USGS's land change analyses, there's a lot of land loss in the 60s, there's a lot of land loss in the 70s, a whole bunch of infrastructure was constructed. There's not land loss in the 80s, 90s, there's really not land loss in that basin until Hurricane Rita. But then thereafter, there's been a lot. And so Hurricane Rita did fill in Central Canal, and then it didn't get cleaned out, and so water found new pathways through the marsh. That's part of the land loss that they saw. You've got uncontrolled inlets and no real outlet to compensate for it. So the ship channel goes up to the GIWW, and then the alkali ditch is pretty much wide open. And we can tell from our sites in there that it's pretty well directly connected to the lake from the north. Saltwater is coming in from the north. And then also at Toledo Bend on the Sabine River, in some years when they've, released the reservoir due to high rainfall, you see it get pulled into the marsh. So, for instance, after Hurricane Harvey, every CRIM site in between Sabine Lake and Calcasieu Lake went up after the storm when the Toledo Bend release got to the coast. Like, it got to the coast and it filtered into the basin instead of going out through Sabine Lake, presumably because of storm surge. And so it filled up, and it took until December to get it back out because there's limited drainage out of there. There's a few lake rim gates that look impressive, but I don't think move near enough water to manage the basin. And then otherwise it just has to evaporate. And so, marsh management works, and it can work, but you've got to get a hold on water level. I think there's an opportunity in that there is no tidal outlet. There's no way for water to go directly into the Gulf. And from some of our measurements, we've seen that that's where the real opportunity lies. So it can work. It did work. It's not been working lately. Here's a water level range chart that you can generate on the CRIM's website. And I've taken a few sites that represent different conditions just to kind of demonstrate that stacked hydrology issue. So that red line is marsh elevation. So the site that sees the Gulf of Mexico, it's got the lowest water level. It's a half a foot lower all day in the Gulf. And then the site on the south end of Calcasieu Lake is a little higher. The south on the north end of Calcasieu Lake is a little higher than that. Sites that are draining into Calcasieu Lake are even higher. And so you can see where the marsh elevation is on that interior marsh, that fourth bar. Basically, you need to get water level there if you're going to effectively manage marshes with gravity drainage. The same goes for Sabine Lake, and so I think there's still an opportunity for gravity drainage. If not, you're already at you need pumps in order to prevent this kind of land loss. We do have a model, I think, for how to address it. It calls for basin scale hydrologic restoration, for planning at the basin scale. They did that at the watershed scale, just east of Calcasieu Lake. The CS87 project is, I think, absolutely how you do it, in that you update your model, you figure out how water does move, then they figured out how to optimize drainage, what features would be needed and where they would need to go. And then they placed the marsh creation on the landscape in places that would benefit the drainage, or at least stay out of the way of the drainage. And I mean, it's basically, I think you would need to apply the same approach. This is 65,000 acres, and we're talking about 330,000 acres. So, and another thing I would point out here is that it kind of had the same problem in that marsh, and that basically it was unable to drain and unable to get down to a healthy level for vegetation. And it took almost a 300% increase in drainage structures that only went out, like 300% increase in flapped drainage. So, you've got the same problem, but at a much larger scale. I think it's fixable. It's the sort of thing that you can fix with millions and millions of dollars. I think as soon as if you were to get a handle on water level in the basin, the land loss slows down and you have time to tune up to do smaller hydrologic restoration projects. But yeah, it's a problem. And I guess that's it for me today.
Okay, any questions? Seeing no questions, okay, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Sharp. This is disturbing news. I appreciate you having Southwest Update, but I wish you were bearing better news. But with all that said, it's better to know and then try and figure it out than to not know and stick our head in the sand. And I'm not convinced this question is for you, Ms. Sharp. It may be for Mr. Leday. I know when I first saw this presentation, there was a lot of interest and a lot of comparisons to what has been done on the eastern side of Calcasieu Lake. Is it safe to assume that we could take that model, beef it up, put some new bells and whistles in it, and apply it to the western side of Calcasieu Lake, and then start building programs, looking for funding streams to try and implement some of these things that your staff has suggested? Because I've got the utmost respect for Ms. Sharp and her abilities and her team, and have been incredibly pleased with our relationship with them in the Lafayette office. Those folks there have been just absolutely incredible in what they've done and their vision. And again, thank you for giving this presentation and sharing this information. And I like the idea that there's an opportunity to maybe do some things before we really get in an extraordinarily bad shape. And so that's my real question is, with the model that was established that did the Cameron Creole work, are we fairly confident that we can go over on the other side of the lake?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Corville. Yeah, I think so. I think, we worked together on CS87 for a long period of time. So I think the general model, whether or not the solutions will all be the same, we obviously can't answer that now. But as Ms. Sharp kind of alluded to, is the start of that project was really that regional model on the east side. I think if we can do something similar on the west side, see what's going on, and then work towards those solutions. As she said, in that particular case, really what helped is that 300% increase in conveyance, but it was the backflow prevention to prevent the salinity from Lake Calcasieu from coming into the east side. And so something similar could work, but I think it's that regional model. As you know, we built on the early Mike flood models, and then we're able to build really a productive, easy working model with Delft 3D. I think taking that and doing the exact same thing on the west side is what we need to do and look at those solutions.
Lose my mic. There it is. Fantastic. So what do we need to do to get there? Is this it? Or do we need to do something more formal? Or do I need to make whatever I need to do, I'm in, because I think you guys can really provide a clear pathway for us to move collectively in the same direction. So whatever that takes, I think I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of Southwest, but I'm gonna, as a fairly meaningful landowner in that region, I know that we share a collective effort in wanting to see something done over there. So whatever it takes, I think we're all in collectively.
Good. Yeah, I think we have Mr. Lazina here from the master plan team, so we'll certainly start with him and the work that we're doing already on the 2029 master plan, and then get back with you on next steps there and how we move this forward.
Okay, Mr. Bourgeois.
Yeah, not so much a question as a comment. As a good presentation. I see in the presentation you said that relative sea level rise was increasing about 1.5 foot since Cheniere Plain infrastructure was designed in the 60s. So that's, 64 years ago, that puts you at a rate at about 2.3 feet per 100 years. And I just want to point out that that's significant, and that's also less than some of the rates that are being tracked by NOAA on relative sea level rise further east at over 3 feet, 3.17 feet per 100 years at Grand Isle, and just over 3 feet at Eugene Island. So what you're doing now translates in the problems that you're uncovering translates across the whole coast, and so this isn't just Calcasieu's problem. This is all of our problem, and we need to get a handle on it. So
for sure. And I'm kind of thinking of it as like the need for a 50-year infrastructure tune-up, that the stuff that you build is probably good for about 50 years. And from that perspective, we're just 20 years late on a 50-year tune-up. But, it's easier to swallow, I think, the need for big projects when you think about it that way. And I think that is where we are. And then the other thing on sea level, like I was showing Galveston, but you basically see the same trend Gulf-wide. You see the same acceleration Gulf-wide, certainly across coastal Louisiana. And so if you had a water management problem that started in 2016 and was a real pain in 2017, and maybe it was a little bit better in 18, and there was a pain in 19 and 20 until the most recent drought, you have a water management problem if it's not a drought now. And so, thinking back to that most recent experience and where water was that you didn't want it, I think it is a time to plan coast-wide for more of that, because it's relatively low now. We see that it's a cycle. It will be back. And so, definitely plan, harden, raise, do what you can do.
The second part of my statement really is I see that you got your data more or less from the CRIM sites, and we've got CRIMs all over South Louisiana. It's tracking what NOAA is showing on the relative sea level rise. I just looked at what they had in the Sabine, and they're a little coarser. They didn't really give a detail on the gauges that went to Sabine. But I think that maybe this is an opportunity for us to get NOAA to recognize our CRIMS data and put all of these relative sea level rise items across our coast in more detail, which will help us at the federal level to get more attention to just what we're facing here. And I don't know exactly how to do that, but we'll be in touch, Glenn. Just a thought.
Okay, Ms. Cormier.
Leanne, thank you for your presentation. As shocking and alarming as it is, I concur with Mr. Corville. Any monies the state has surplus, this needs to be done as of yesterday. And so to light a fire under you, like I did the Army Colonel a couple of years ago. We would like to see this done as soon as possible. I would like to remind everyone, we have not only, and when y'all do your presentation to the Super Bowl in 2025, you might include Southwest Louisiana in there and the world economic development growth that's going down there in the LNG plants, as well as our strategic petroleum reserves that I do believe we had to tap into a couple of years ago. We need to protect these very massive environmental and industrial complexes down there. So when you protect Cameron Parish, you protect Calcasieu Parish and the remainder of Louisiana above us. So it's very important that when you do all of the reporting, advertising, marketing, media, we include all the economic, I think it's I'm sure I'm off, but $108 billion worth of economic expansion. We were leading the world last year, the year before, in economic development down there. So I think it's vitally important. Thank you for looking at this. Kudos to CPRA and their CRIMS project. We can't say enough good things about them. We've been saying this for years. This was happening, but to have data to put behind it, it's a great resource. Thank you for all your hard work and for all of CPRA. And we know that if there's any surplus money, that it will be coming our way, right, Mr. Gordy, for these very much needed projects in Southwest Louisiana. So I concur with Mr. Corville. We need to do that as soon as possible.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Gordy.
I had to give you an answer. Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Sharp. Very informative. Thank you for everything you do for
Thank you.
CPRA. And we have a presentation of the fisheries sampling, Electrofisher, Christopher Scheibel, Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and then the final is the federal update with Neil McMillan right after the presentation of the fisheries. Yes, sir. Please state your name.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Chris Scheibele. I'm the Director of Marine Fisheries for Wildlife and Fisheries. And I appreciate the time today for our department to come here and give you this presentation. It's a bit lengthy, but I will try to move through as quickly as possible and answer any questions when we get to the end. So as everyone is well aware in this room, we've had astronomical land loss, which is fisheries habitat loss over the past 40 years, roughly about 17 square miles annually, which is the whole football field an hour analogy that we use. But that is equaled about 640 square miles of fisheries habitat that's not there anymore. And in these two pictures, you can see the gear type that we use, and we've been using since 1985, is a 50-foot beach seine. And this is one of our many gear types that we have. And the use of this is to track our juvenile index of recruitment for many species, but most importantly, our stock assessment species. And some of those include redfish and spotted sea trout that we've had management changes most recently. And you can see in the top picture, the ideal habitat you would want to pull one of these seines up onto is a gradually sloping marsh with some submerged grass at the edge and then a harder marsh substrate up on top. But unfortunately, the bottom picture is what most of our sites have become, a sharp marsh edge due to hurricanes repeatedly damaging the marsh and eroding it very rapidly. And this gear type has become largely ineffective due to that habitat change. So I'll start with some history behind the electrofishing. Shortly after the oil spill, an NGO petitioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to list this particular species of fish. It looks like a cockahoe, but it's called a salt marsh top minnow, to the endangered species list. We wrote a grant the department did, it's called the State Wildlife Grant, to survey this species of fish using novel gear type. In the past, it's been surveyed using traps and seines and nets, but we decided we're going to try to do some saltwater electrofishing to get a better handle on the population size of this species. So in the top corner is the Smith Route 9.0 GPP, which at the time was the highest conductivity electrofisher that you could pretty much find. They don't make it anymore. And it was limited to about 24,000 microsiemens conductivity, which equals about 20 parts per thousand salinity. We modified one of our net boats with a safety railing in that bottom picture for staff to be able to electrofish in salt water. But again, it was limited to a maximum salinity of about 20 parts per thousand with its efficiency. I put this poster up here because this was a presentation at our Louisiana AFS meeting in 2017 with preliminary results. I want to draw your attention to that graph figure in the very middle with the blue and orange bars. It was our first indicator that electrofishing was really pulling more of the species we were after than the seines. It was the first comparison we had of side-by-side sampling, and the catch effort was incrementally higher for salt marsh top minnows from the electrofisher versus the seine. So we extrapolated vegetation transects over the habitat that we were sampling in Barataria Bay, along with salinity gradients, to develop GIS layers of what we found to be optimal habitat, and expanded the Barataria sampling statewide to look at potential habitat that these salt marsh top minnows could live in across the entire state, with the goal of developing a population abundance model. In the end, statistics came in, and we came up with an estimate between 18 million and 81 million salt marsh top minnows statewide, which is not what people expected when they petitioned this to be an endangered species. So it turned out to be some positive news for once. And then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service used this data as part of their population model for that species. And the NGO rescinded their petition to elevate this species to endangered. So using that data, we added some electrofishing sampling to our CS11 contract with you all for the monitoring that we do statewide, particularly mostly in the Barataria Basin. And we conducted side-by-side sampling from 2018 to 2023 using the electrofisher alongside the seine sampling. So seine samples were conducted on the exact same day, at the exact same site as electrofishing to really get a pilot study of how effective this gear really was compared to what we were doing at those same stations with the seine. And you can see the highlighted bullet there. It says electrofishing samples had a substantial increase in catch rate for all of our assessment species, with the exception of black drum and Gulf menhaden. We're not sure exactly what's going on with black drum with that gear type, but the Gulf menhaden is particular because the majority of the menhaden that show up in the seine samples are about the size of an anchovy. So they get stuck in there because of debris in the seine and don't pass through the mesh, where we don't have debris in the nets when we're using an electrofisher. So there's less of them, but it's an artifact of gear type, that's all. So here's a quick comparison. Green are electrofishing bars, blue are the seine samples, and you can see for important species like the first one, which is red drum, redfish, and spotted sea trout is a third, and then even southern flounder further down the line there, that the electrofisher consistently sampled more in catch effort than the seines did. And this is statistically that comparison. So I highlighted important species that we've had to make management changes on most recently. So red drum, the catch effort between the comparison of the electrofisher to the seine was a positive 342% increase or change over the seine samples in that same period of time. Spotted sea trout is 633% change. And southern flounder is 1,683%, but I have some caveats because the percent standard error is over 30%, but it still gives you the relative picture that it's an increase, not a decrease in the sampling effort there. So to compare to what other state management agencies are doing, we looked into some of the stuff they're doing on the East Coast with striped bass, for their to develop their indices of relative abundance for recruitment on juvenile striped bass. And a lot of these states pull seine samples at the mouths of rivers because we know that striped bass go up a river to spawn, and the juveniles come out the river and end up completing their life cycle out in saltwater. So it's pretty easy compared to what we're doing here. In Maryland, this is exactly what they do. They develop an index of recruitment. That index compared to the long-term average, this is 2022 data. I hadn't had a chance to put recent data in there yet, but they have the ability to compare to their long-term average over time with that. Virginia Institute of Marine Science does the same thing, and they were able to track in the Chesapeake Bay that recruitment index was very similar to their long-term 10-year average. And this shows you the ability to track that average catch over time. And it's a long-term indice of abundance, which is what all state agencies are trying to do with all the species that they manage. Long-term data sets are very important. You can see year classes that spike where you've got a great recruitment year and other years where it drops below the average and you need to figure out why or take management actions. This is the newest way that one of the states, Delaware, is actually doing this instead of using SANES. So they're using electrofishing surveys to develop that index. Now, I have some caveats here because they're after small 3-inch striped bass for recruitment. But the picture's deceiving because who wants to take a picture with 3-inch striped bass, right? So they took a picture with adults, but that's not what the study's about, just so you realize that. And this tracks the length frequency distribution of striped bass that they collected in that particular year, but they are able to take the same length frequency distributions from each sampling year and compare them as these fish make their way into the slot fishery. So you'll see those vertical bars in the middle of the graph. It shows they have two different slots for striped bass, but you can track as those fish that are recruited come into the fishery and enter that slot, and you'll know the abundance before they enter the fishery. That's the key factor with this here. So the big picture or takeaway message from why I'm showing you all this is that this is a form of proactive fisheries management, not reactive fisheries management. So fisheries managers like myself, we typically have stock assessments that are done every 3 to 5 years, depending on the species. And the reason for that is because it takes that long to develop a data set from the way we collect the data to have enough of a robust data set to do a stock assessment. That's typically how stock assessments are done by every state agency, federal agency across the entire country. And you can see as an example in the upper left corner, I'm sure everyone here has seen this as we went through the spotted sea trout deliberations. That's our spawning stock biomass. It got to a point where we had to do recovery. But the problem here is that it was allowed basically to get to that point before we could take action on it because of the frequency of which we do stock assessments. An example of what could cause some of that are winter severity indices. We track those, but they can affect a particular recruitment year class. And to track that year by year is important. And the SANE samples that we're currently taking aren't giving us that data to be able to do that yet. So here's the fun part. Last fall, I was able to test a new piece of equipment. It's built by a company up in Missouri. They call it the Infinity Electrofisher. It can sample in the Mississippi River with 0.2 parts per thousand, and it can sample in full seawater, which we did in Lake Calcasieu during the drought last year. The boat is just one of their boats that they actually have the unit. The particular unit is in the bottom right-hand corner picture. That's the control box that allows you to do this. And if you notice in the upper right-hand picture, there's not one, but there's actually two 220 generators in the boat that are 40 kilowatts apiece. So that's how much power literally you could backfeed your house with this thing is running into the water. But here's the important concept. Every one of these are the type and size of species that we're trying to track with the SANES, and it revealed that in every sample that we did over there. We have juvenile spotted sea trout in the upper left. We have a juvenile red drum in the middle, and juvenile drum and spotted sea trout in the upper right-hand corner. And especially the size and species I'm after in that lower left corner, that's a spotted sea trout from that same year class that we would have. And also, most notably, I put the picture with the menhaden in there because it shows you two different cohorts. It has the ability to sample not only adult-sized menhaden, but the juveniles from that year class coming up. So not a lot of gear types sample multiple cohorts of the same species at the same time. So what we did two 90-second duplicate electrofishing samples at each of the same stations that we pulled SANES at. So just make note, there were only 90 seconds of the electrofisher being on at one time. And it had pretty much the exact same number of species in each of the samples. So you probably picked up spotted sea trout, red drum flounder, et cetera. But abundance of those in each is significantly different, just like it was with our CPRA samples, our CS11 samples we've been doing since 2018. You know, it's the catch effort for red drum was 22.85, and with the seines, it was only 0.09. In other words, we just didn't really catch any. And we also had a significantly higher biomass, which means more individuals of that species in 90 seconds than you did with a 50-foot seine haul. That's important as well. And you can see that by the total weight, 121 grams versus 1,146 grams per species in the electrofishing gear. So we as a department decided to put together a juvenile sport fish electrofishing proposal to test this unit as a pilot study, as we had done with the CS11 project, to side-by-side sample with seines. And we want to develop a quantitative fishery-independent electrofishing survey methodology as a replacement for those seine surveys to track the relative abundance and distribution of our young-of-the-year juveniles, especially our stock assessment species over time. Those are the critical ones. We want to establish a baseline of those, but also develop a long-term time series like we currently have with the seine. That's 40 years of data, but it's starting to not give us what we need anymore because of habitat loss. So this was our grant proposal. We were awarded it by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the Sport Fish Restoration Funds, which we currently get. However, this year, we found out our Sport Fish Restoration Fund budget was cut after we received this grant. So we had to rescind the grant and then use that money to cover the gap for our existing sampling, funding-wise, that we need, which at the time is more important, considering the species that we're working through right now with red drum and spotted sea trout management changes. So this is a brief summary of the budget that we had for that grant. And then this is what the company provided to us. They are building basically a saltwater version of one of our one of our net boats that can house the saltwater electrofisher within it, just for something that is more useful to this department than a small boat that's probably going to get swamped when it crosses Barataria Bay, right? But you can see that these are not cheap. The total price on these are $750,000 a piece. And the department, in order to do a pilot study, would probably need at least 2 of these to start with to split the state in half. And that's the reason I stuck that in there. And this is the current budget that we have with our CS11 contract. And I put this in here because I just wanted to show you at the very bottom is the annual budget for year 1 on the contract for this year is $1.6 million. And it has a comparison between the cost per sample for seines versus our electrofishing if we were to still be doing it, which we're not. The cost per sample is roughly about $70 more per sample this year. It goes up, as it's amortized over the cost, but roughly over each year, it's about a 5% increase to replace the seine samples cost per sample with electrofishing cost per sample. That does not include the cost of the unit. It's the actual sample that day to go to that site, get the sample done with the staff that are out there, and then process and work up the samples, same as we would do with a seine. So the expected benefits, as I mentioned before, we're trying to get better estimates of year class strength with less uncertainty as these fish recruit into the estuary, and it's become more difficult with habitat loss over time. But we really want to have the ability to forecast future stock conditions for recreational and commercially important finfish species with more certainty. So that's that proactive management that I mentioned earlier when I showed you that spawning stock biomass trout graph. If we can get ahead of the curve, maybe some management changes that we have to make in the future won't be as draconian as what we've had to do recently. We may be able to see these trends coming with year class reductions and offer less restrictive changes to our commission for them to have as options. Instead of having to wait for a full stock assessment, we may be able to get indices of recruitment annually that we can produce. And it may be the opposite as well. We might track really good year classes, and then instead of having to wait for another stock assessment 5 years down the road, there's the potential, I'm not guaranteeing it, but there's the potential that we could possibly have some management changes we present to the commission in the interim that are short term to increase opportunity to our anglers and our commercial fisheries. My favorite picture off the side of their boat. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Okay, Mr. Corville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Shibley, for the presentation. I don't know if this question is for you or for Mr. Leday or for Mr. Dove or who. The CS11, I mean, the samples that you guys are doing in concert, is that for existing project monitoring? Is it for regional monitoring to be incorporated into the more regional planning? Can somebody help me understand how that data is currently being used in this sort of planning and project development process? Is that?
I'll start if you want. Yeah, so, we do a number of monitoring activities partnering with Wildlife and Fisheries. I think that was one example. We have swamp and other really basin-wide and regional monitoring that we utilize these tools. So I don't know specific, I guess, if we're talking about CS 11, is that right? Is one particular example of those. But yeah, so in general, we do a lot of work with Wildlife and Fisheries partnering on this work.
Yeah, so the CS11 contract includes 16-foot trawls in various locations, mostly in Barataria. It includes the seine sampling, also includes some gill nets in different basins, and as Mr. Leday mentioned, the swamp samples, which are, it's an acronym, System-Wide Area Management Plan for oysters. So they have particular square meter oyster diving that is done in particular areas in Barataria and also east of the river as well, that combines with our regular samples.
And so where I'm going with this is I assume this data is included in like the habitat suitability and models and all that other stuff. It would seem to me that if Wildlife and Fisheries had this capacity to do broader basin-wide evaluations, establish benchmarks across the coast, we could use that in pre-project evaluation and post-project to see if we are truly having fisheries displacement or whatever the new term is for that. But also, I know when we do these WVA models, we have a lot of assumptions based on potential fisheries positives or negatives. This could help validate some of those assumptions and maybe refine that just a little bit. And then we could probably use this data to really show how critical edge habitat is in relation to fisheries productivity. Am I missing something? Is that a fair judgment or assessment?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So we've all seen the Don Ball's papers on edge effect, and I think, it's just my opinion looking at our fisheries data, but we've passed a tipping point. I can't pinpoint exactly what year it is because we have so many hurricanes recently, but somewhere probably shortly after Katrina, I think we've achieved that tipping point of marsh edge production, and we may be starting to head down the backside of that because of the habitat loss. So any better method that we can have to monitor fisheries while we're sliding down that slope and trying to catch up with restoration projects at the same time would help us tremendously.
And I guess where I'm going with, you said the cost is about $750,000 per unit, which will always be a lot of money in the world that I live in. However, in these project, we're talking about 50 million, 100 million. I even heard the word today, 500 million didn't seem to make anybody uncomfortable in their chair, maybe besides me. $750,000, if you did 3 of these units, 4 of these units to really be on the cutting edge and put Louisiana where we belong as far as coastal restoration. And then what I like about it is the sort of productivity measurement where you can measure benefits of the good things that CPRA and other partners are doing that are yielding benefits. So I know Mr. McMillan's in the room. I mean, somebody's got to help us fund get some of these devices in the hands of our experts at Wildlife and Fisheries so that we can start collecting this data and frankly, put some data behind all the good stuff that you guys are doing. So I'd kind of make a call to arms, if you will, if we can collectively figure out how we can get some money to buy some of these devices and put it in the hands of our biologists. It seems really like a no-brainer. So I would offer my services. I suspect everybody else in this restoration world would too, to try and find a way to get some funding to buy some of these units and get it in the hands of you guys so we can really, document what's going on out there. But again, thank you for bringing this presentation. I think this is the future, no doubt. We've got to evolve. This is what evolution looks like. And, again, it pains me to say $750,000 is not a lot of money, but in the big picture and what we're really dealing with, it really isn't that much for a couple of these units to get you guys. So thanks again. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Chair,
Alford.
can I follow up real quick?
Yes.
To his statement? So if you all approached me or Mr. Leday approached me and said, how would you sample or monitor restoration projects such as Independence Island that has rocks all around the outside of it or whatever, I would have really no current sampling gear type that we could use for that. Or if you have a living shoreline, for example, with HESCO baskets and oysters inside of it, I don't have gear that could actually sample that to tell you if it's productive and it's recruiting small, individual sport fish. The benefit of those projects couldn't really be analyzed from a fisheries standpoint, but with this piece of equipment, we could easily sample that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter what habitat it is. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Alford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shebel, that was a nice presentation. I would be in 100% support. I kind of think we're behind the eight ball to not have that information based on what a seine does and what this system does. So I would give it 100% support. I think it's a necessity, it sounds like to me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And with that, the board is clear, and we thank you, Mr. Scheibel, for great presentation. And a federal update, Neil McMillan, DENR. Mr. McMillan.
Sorry, where is it?
Not this one.
There it is. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board, for inviting me to talk about some federal updates. And I guess before I start, obviously, so grateful that this weekend's attack on our former president was unsuccessful, and that we can kind of proceed with, I guess, business as usual with that in mind. But and thoughts go out to the family of those affected by that. But today we'll focus on the oversight hearing that Mr. Leday participated in on project labor agreements, as well as some developments on the revenue sharing front. So right after our board meeting this June, we went to DC, where Director Leday testified for the oversight committee on the impacts of these project labor agreements, these, I guess, pre-construction negotiations with the labor union, one or more labor unions before construction starts. I guess what effect they would have on our coastal program, since they deal with federal construction projects over $35 million. We were kind of brought into this thanks to Congressman Higgins, who'd been leading some legislation. And it really comes to our partnership with the Army Corps, that when the Army Corps' construction budget is affected, we're brought in that too. This hearing had a lot of strong participation from the Republican side, lighter participation from the Democrat side, but it was, we probably had 10 plus members do questions, so it was pretty substantial, even though it had been delayed and interrupted. Joining CPRA was witnesses from the American Builders and Contractors Association, a large employee-owned company that was not unionized, and then a Ohio-based company that did lots of these project labor agreements. So there was, I guess, a range of construction expertise there. And so we presented based off kind of the early understanding of what this would mean for us, as currently West Shore and SELA are kind of the projects that would get contracts this big at this time, though we anticipate much more. And so Mr. Leday's themes was really that it adds a ton of uncertainty to our partnership with the Corps that's essential for us to have and vital for coastal restoration and protection, but is already has its own challenges. And we identified kind of 4 areas of impact that were significant and concerning. Cost escalation being a top one, reduced bid submissions from fewer companies participating, which could relate back to cost. Project delays and what that means for the coastal program and our communities, and then reduced opportunities with the workforce. We also shared how this kind of violates the spirit of our right to work laws in Louisiana, as well as the makeup of our workforce. And we recommended that this be, repealed or changed to exempt civil works projects. And then we also showed that if you have goals of involving workforce and creating better jobs, stuff like the Coastal Technical Advisory Center, CTAC, that LED and CPRA have partnered on, I mean, that's a great example of kind of reaching the local businesses and workers, which presumably is the goal of some of this policy. So we'll run through kind of some of the Q&A that Mr. Lede participated in. And first was with the chairwoman Mace of the subcommittee. She was kind of interested in whether there was fewer opportunities for businesses and for state residents, as well as general risk to contracting costs, and we indicated yes. She was also like, well, is this necessary to do, large federal construction projects? Because that's the presumption of the executive order, is it helps reduce uncertainty and costs for construction projects. And we're able to point to our partnership on the HISDRA system, which is the largest core civil works project that obviously did not have these type of agreements. Then Chairman Comer, the full committee came in, and he was interested in, the impact to contractors. And so we were able to point to the first project that had this requirement. We had one bid where, 4 to 5 or even 10 bids would have been a much more normal and beneficial type of participation rate. And then he was also interested in how the delays could impact. And we don't know this at first, but he made the comment kind of afterwards as an aside that, the Corps is known to be so fast. And obviously he meant that, you just don't want extra hurdles because there's already a lot when working with federal partners. And then Congressman Higgins, we'll have to figure out how to get his 5-minute Q&A out there because it's really interesting and passionate, and it was his classic style that's very memorable. So he kind of go through kind of the different parts of his testimony, but he first cast this issue that he's very passionate about as an issue on freedom. And so he's just got such a way of taking this back of because we've been talking about individual impacts, but he was like, what you're doing is just excluding people from participating in federal construction. And, he was like, if you reverse it and only allowed non-union companies to participate, obviously people would have a problem with it too. So he was definitely suggested a level playing field in his style. And then back to the Q&A, he first brought in kind of, well, what's this mean for Louisiana? What type, how many people can participate with this? And Mr. Lede was able to discuss that only 3% of our workforce is union labor. So that's obviously a big exclusion. And that this was all voluntarily. There's not barriers to union or union participation. This is just kind of, the work culture, if you will. So that was kind of the workforce side. Then he also dealt with the monetary side. So we discussed kind of if you have a 12 to 20% increase in cost, which is what the studies indicate these type of agreements can add, what's that mean? And you take the one project of West Shore Lake Pontchartrain, and 12 to 20% of that total cost would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so obviously that was very, very telling. And then Congressman Higgins also talked about, is it even feasible to have this requirement if there's so little workforce? I guess that's something we'll see as it comes through. And then the last question was from Congresswoman Fox. She was very interested in the budgetary costs and the impact to the state. And so we're able to kind of imply that, if we have to spend more money for these projects, that shrinks what we can do elsewhere. And as we've gone through today, there's a lot more we would like to do. So that concludes that hearing. We'll turn to a Senate Energy and Natural Resource hearing that Senator Cassidy participated in. And this was with the Deputy Secretary nominee, Esteno, and that's the number 2 person at Interior. And it's kind of an exciting appointment. It's been vacant for a while, but she has such a strong experience in Gulf of Mexico and coastal restoration, which usually is not the background for someone at Interior. And she's spent her career with the Everglades, and also just last year we as CPRA and National Wildlife Federation and Sustain the Nine hosted her for like a New Orleans area tour, which she's obviously enjoying that Louisiana alligators are better than Florida alligators in the top corner. But Senator Cassidy was able to bring up, I guess, the importance of the RISE Act and additional revenue sharing, and she had a really enthusiastic answer about how it was a good return of investment. Coastal resiliency was essential to support. And that's different because usually Department of Interior does not want to send the revenue they collect out to the states. They want to do their own programs. And so just that warm reception and casting GOMESA in the coastal resiliency scene, I thought was a really successful way to deal with this with her and hopefully folks like her. And so I was encouraged to see that. And speaking of the RISE Act, the defense bill has been introduced in the Senate. The RISE Act has been filed as an amendment. This is more of a, I guess, placeholder and conversation starter that the supporters want it to pass this year. That's one of the few bills that passes each year. But there's a kind of breakdown there. There's a lot of financial challenges, so we have to offset the cost. But I guess it just continues to show that they're taking it seriously and that trying to keep top of mind that this is a priority. So we'll see kind of what comes of that. And then also before the next board meeting, we'll have an offshore wind lease sale in the Central Atlantic. And so I put up the maps of the 2 lease tracks, and these will be the first lease sales in a while off these states. And so it really brings Delaware, which is the president's home state, of course, Maryland and Virginia into the revenue sharing conversation. There's been some kind of proactive support for this, but now we'll likely have some money left on the table and hope that can kind of build off our shores outreach. And then it'll also be interesting to see what the industry interest is, because this will be the first lease sale after in the Gulf of Mexico that had a lot lower bid level. And then also, just speaking of project labor agreements, Interior's put a stipulation on these lease sales that they need to have project labor agreements to win the bid, in addition to another workforce plan and fisheries mitigation. So that's kind of, to me, that's something to be aware of and kind of challenging as we're working with Nunez Community College to have like offshore wind training. And, we're trying to, we tout our workforce when it comes to offshore energy here. Just kind of concerned to see that is brought up, not quite as a complete requirement, but as a stipulation. So it's just, it's interesting to see that pop up in different areas. It's kind of the importance for telling our story, I guess. And then the last thing is just congratulations to Lafourche Parish, Grand Isle, Greater Lafourche Port Commission, and Restore Retreat. They secured what I consider maybe the most competitive grant application across the country is the RAISE grant. This is the discretionary funding from U.S. Department of Transportation. It's to study that stretch of LA1 from Fouchon to, I guess, Elmer's Island, basically, for kind of what resiliency measures they need. This will be a planning grant, so hopefully it'll identify solutions for protecting that infrastructure that will kind of branch into kind of hopefully marsh restoration, coastal protection. So something it's always great to see is that another pot of funding access to kind of help us identify some more solutions. And with that, Chairman Dove, ready for any questions if the board has any.
And I'd like to bring up a point. When we first found out about the PLAs being required on Corps of Engineers and other government contracts over $35 million. You know, Glenn Leday went up there and testified on behalf of Louisiana along with Neil. And what's so important about that, as everyone knows, we pay a 35% cost share, and we're looking at it as much as a 20% increase. And you know, the worst thing about it is forcing unions on a right-to-work state like Louisiana. The only good thing is this contract, this executive order can be canceled in January, and so hopefully it will be, because this would really hurt the different projects like Moganda to the Gulf and West Shore, these other projects that the Corps is actually going to handle themselves. And so I want to tell Glenn and y'all did a great job, and we are monitoring it closely along with the federal delegation. So thank y'all.
Thank you, Chairman. On that point, it is interesting. We need to really have our delegation convinced and share that story, because like Vice Presidential candidate Vance and is really close to labor unions, and so that makes sense in Ohio. But we need to make sure that it's not a nationwide application.
You know, and a good example is the West Shore that went out. The contractor who got it, there was only one bid, and he bid $34,999,000, so he didn't have to have union, because he did not have union, and that's what that forced, is just a one bid, and luckily we're moving forward with that particular project. Mr. Leday?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Dove and Mr. McMillan. Y'all did a good job explaining that. One thing we try to point out to the committee is that what we're dealing with now is a nationwide mandate, whereas before it was encouraged, and as you indicated, states that had high percentage of active union labor could still participate, and they actually told some success stories. What we're dealing with in Louisiana is we just don't have that in this right-to-work state, and so it's challenging for us, and I think they really understood that after the testimony. Want to just commend Colonel Jones and the New Orleans district. They're dealing with a difficult situation and doing the best that they can. And I know Chairman Dove has had many conversations with the Colonel about that. But the Corps is doing the best they can with the executive order, and so we were able to work through that. But it's really the nationwide mandate, in particular in Louisiana, where we just have 3% of the state that is active in unions.
Right, and that's a good point. You know, we've been in touch with Colonel Jones, and as you know, it's a direct order from the President of the United States, so he has no choice with the Corps of Engineers. But the one thing that is outrageous is the executive order was actually signed in 2022 and just enforced during this election year, which is just politics at its worst. So with that, great job, and seeing no more questions. Oh, Mr. Bourgeois.
Just wanted to publicly thank Congressman Higgins for bringing this forward. Make sure that he knows he's tracking things for Louisiana, and I think he's doing a great job. Like he said, nothing against unions, they're just not here, and these executive orders are always tried to be a one-size-fits-all. We've seen it in several other executive orders, most recently federal flood risk management standards that are just been a final rule released on that. That's not going to be good for Louisiana, where it could be good for other parts of the nation. So put that on the radar, if you will. But we owe Congressman Higgins our gratitude for bringing this to everyone's attention. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Alphen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think a lot of people know, but about 25 states are right to work. If they're so enthusiastic about using labor unions to do the work, the right to work states don't have the union workers to do that work. And so, man, good luck with that. That makes a big difference in everything that we do, and the cost, and where we're going to find these workers.
You know, and a good point one of the congressmen made, or congresswoman, I believe, made, is the unions would like it if they weren't allowed to bid it, and it had to be only non-union. They wouldn't like it reversed, okay? But go ahead, Mr. McMillan.
Sorry, I was just going to add that the optionality of using this was instituted with President Obama and kept through President Trump, and over 3,000 construction projects went forward, and only 12 were used this mechanism. So I guess the adoption on a voluntary basis is very low, and so I think that was a really startling number to share at the hearing.
Okay, and with that, we have a clear board, and I thank you, Mr. McMillan. And we have one request to speak, Mr. Doug Daigle, on Louisiana Hypoxia Working Group. Mr. Daigle.
Thank you. Doug Daigle with the Louisiana Hypoxia Working Group, and I just briefly wanted to give you an update on something I hadn't been able to do at the last meeting. And just in case you didn't know, there were some resolutions of interest that were passed in the legislative session. House Concurrent Resolution Number 29, sponsored by Representative Zarang, which reaffirmed the legislature's support for the annual hypoxia mapping cruise that goes out every summer from the Louisiana University's Marine Consortium in Cocodrie. It's actually getting ready to head out next week. And the resolution included, as it has previously, support for the continued funding of that cruise by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And that's something we want to continue. We have gotten some signals that they may not be thinking about funding it in the future, so it was important that the legislature reaffirm their support for that. Another one was House Concurrent Resolution Number 49, sponsored by Representative Thompson, and that commended the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry and the Office of Soil and Water Conservation for the cooperative conservation work that they do across the state, but it highlighted the work that they're doing that's helping to support the Gulf Hypoxia Action Plan in Louisiana. And it also included a statement of support for them being treated as full partners in the state's hypoxia efforts. And then finally, back in the May meeting of the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries Commission, a resolution was passed commending and supporting the department for the work that it's doing that's helping to support Louisiana's hypoxia work. And it also included a statement of support for that department being treated as full partners in the state's hypoxia efforts as well. So I'm going to send Inger the links to these so you can they're all online, you can look at them, but I'll facilitate that by sending the links to her.
And you know, Mr. Daigle, the more I read on hypoxia, the more I see that the dead zone in the Gulf is just going to grow and grow as more. I was reading, and you may correct me on this, but 2 to 3% of the problem with hypoxia is not Louisiana. Louisiana only attributes 2 to 3%. The nitrogen and phosphorus more comes from the northern states, and so it's going to take a Congress to step in. And I know there's a move to try to lower it at least 20% of the runoffs and the phosphorus and nitrogen and the fertilizers, and of course the cattle and what have you, and human sewage. And this is definitely something we're going to take a hard look at. I've talked to you, and it's something we need to address because the Chaffalaya and the Mississippi River are the cause of it into the Gulf, but it's not, it's not Louisiana as much as the rest of the states in the United States. So I think I know more about hypoxia than I thought I would, but I've been doing a lot of reading, and thanks to you let me know a lot of things, and we will stay on top of it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we have a clear, I'm sorry, we have.
I'm motioning to adjourn.
Oh, okay. Okay, we have on the motion by Mr. Corville to adjourn, second by Mr. Bourgeois, and no one opposed. That this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much. Very informative and great group. Thank you.